Right, hello, and welcome to the Great Pesticide Debate. Both to those of you in the room and those of us who are joining us on a live stream. Before I forget, I should also mention that there's a Twitter handle for this event as well, which is #Pesticides Debate. So as this goes on, you can join in as well, and in the middle section of the debate, we'll be able to take some questions from Twitter here in the room as well. Just a very brief introduction to me. I am Christian Oliver. I am the Trade and Agriculture Editor at Politico. Egbert kindly described me as an agriculture expert. That is not true at all. I've been doing this job for a grand total of 4 months, and although I've sort of realized the sensitivity of this pesticides question, I admit that the only thing I've really learned is you shouldn't be really crazy enough to express a personal opinion on it. So we're very glad that we've actually got 2 rival teams here who are totally willing to do so, and we hope that they're a very balanced team at that. Before I actually introduce you to who these teams are, just like a quick moment to ask Graham Taylor from ECPA to come up and share just a brief video and make some remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Graham Taylor. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for the European Crop Protection Association. I want to thank you all for being here, particularly to thank the 2 sets of panelists for being here for what is an incredibly important debate. I think having a full room here today is testament to how important that debate is and the issues that are at stake. I don't know if any of you saw a report in the BBC News this morning that said that Oxford Dictionary had announced that post-truth was its word of the year. And they have said that it could become, one of the defining words of our time. And anyone who's seen recent political events would certainly agree with that. We live in an era where the distrust of facts, where lies, rumor, gossip, misinformation, it can spread at the speed of light, and where this term truthiness, the intuition of what should be right is more important than what is actually fact, and an era where complexity is damned as a sleight of hand that experts are used to confuse people into thinking a certain way. And those of you who saw the debate on Brexit in the UK, certainly saw the effectiveness of the term, we've all had enough of experts. And I think this has far-reaching implications for all of us and for the decisions, the debates that happen in Brussels, particularly when it relates to pesticides and the production of food. It's an impact that goes beyond just the frustration of those working in the sector. It strikes right at the heart of the challenge of providing sufficient, safe and affordable food for an ever-growing world population. And I would use a specific example from my sector that would highlight this. Glyphosate, which is a substance that many of you in this room will have heard about. There was a particular controversy recently. And it shows how polarized the debate is, how complex the debate is, and how difficult it is when we're talking about communicating on essentially science. By many measures, glyphosate is one of the safest products to have ever been put on the market. Farmers will widely testify that, to the difficulty of farming without it, and the dangerous impact on the environment if they're asked to. In addition, scientists have 90,000 pages of evidence, 3,500 peer-reviewed studies, regulatory authorities around the world, EFSA, you name it. Everyone has said glyphosate is safe for use. But yet one particular study done by IARC was miscommunicated, misrepresented, and it was able to shape an entire debate. It was able to create uncertainty, and most worryingly, it was able to create fear, particularly in the public, and that's a big concern for us. The reality is today that it pays, in both a metaphorical and literal sense, it seems, to be outrageous rather than truthful. And I wonder if today I was standing here with a red hat with Make Pesticides Great Again emblazoned across it, whether that would have a sufficient impact or not. But of course, you might say that it's typical of someone from the pesticide industry to stand here and perhaps accuse people of being ignorant of facts. And that's certainly not what I'm doing. I think the point I'm trying to make is that today people face a deluge of facts, and I would say facts in sort of inverted commas. And a combination of increased access to technology, looking at Facebook, Twitter, feeds that are constructed to feed your existing or your instinctive bias on any particular issue. We're not all getting the full picture. And that's why we wanted to have this debate today. As a society, we can't progress until we're willing to have the difficult conversations. Today might not work out in our favor in the end. That's a risk that we're willing to take, because the most important thing that we think is that we need to have the conversation, and that we have to show people we're willing to listen to their concerns, and that we're willing to address them. And I wanted to finish with one very short quote, and it's by Marie Curie. And it says, "Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less." And I hope we can all do that. And I look forward to the debate. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Graham. So it's time to get back to the pre-post-truth period now. And first of all, I think the first thing I will do is introduce you to our teams. And supporting the motion, which is slashing pesticide use will prevent farmers from providing enough safe and affordable food, is Mr. Herbert Dorfmann, who's a member of the European Parliament and member of the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee. He is joined by Lynn Field, Head of Biological Chemistry and Crop Protection Department at Rothamsted Research, and Tom Short, who is Chairman of Wicklow County and the Irish Farmers Association. On the opposing team, as the MEP on the other side, we have Margrethe Auken, who's a member of the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety Committee. She is joined by Peter Klausing, who is member of the Executive Board of the Pesticide Action Network in Germany. And finally, we are joined by Philippe Rothgeber, who's a fruit and vine grower, an organic fruit and vine grower, is this right? At his farm, Rothgeber Farm. So please, first of all, welcome our teams. The structure of the debate will be that each of the parties, from the MEP, then the scientist, then the farmer, will each make a 4-minute presentation, which will be counted on the other side. Then I will open up the floor so that you can ask a question. At that point, please tell me who you would, or which group you would like to direct a question to, and each of those parties will each answer for a minute on each side. Then we'll have concluding remarks, and then a final vote. To start off with, though, I'm going to ask you to, going back to the title of today's debate, which is Slashing Pesticides Use Will Prevent Farmers from Providing Enough Safe and Affordable Food. I'd like to take a first show of hands, please, and just sort of keep them up for a good sort of 15 seconds so I can take... Do you want them to shout instead? If you have a show of hands, now who is in favour of the motion? Okay, keep your hands there. Good. And against the motion? Okay. So a heavy majority at the moment in favour of the motion, but we have the debate, and let's see whether the swing will go the other way. So first of all, Mr. Dorfmann, can I ask you to start with your first 4 minutes please, speaking in favour of the motion.
Good afternoon. Thanks to Politico for this opportunity. Well, I think there's a fundamental problem in growing crops and keeping livestock. Sometimes they are affected by diseases. Diseases are a common problem for conventional farmers and for organic farmers. And I'm quite convinced there's sometimes a misunderstanding. Often people think that once a farmer decides to become an organic farmer, crops and animals aren't affected anymore by diseases. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Farmers need to step in when their crops or their animals have a problem. If they want to avoid to lose their production, they need to intervene with substances which are able to kill the pathogen. And the only difference between conventional farming on one side and organic farming on the other side is which methods and which substances they use. Therefore, the question, I think, is not if it's good or convenient to use a lot of pesticides in agriculture. It's all quite obvious. Less we use, the better it is. But there are 3 points. First, yields and availability of food. The use of chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers in conventional agriculture increases yields at least for 25%. Let me just remind one figure. To produce 1 kilo of wheat in Europe, you need, in the average, 1.3 square meters of land. If you want to produce the same 1 kilo of wheat in organic farming, you need 2.8 square meters. So it means that in order to produce the same amount of wheat in Europe to organic farming, and we produce in Europe more or less what we need, we would need the double of arable land we use today. Considering that the amount of fuel, of lubricants in conventional and organic farming is more or less the same, this means double the use of fuel, double CO2 emissions. The today population in the world is 7.8 billion people. We will come to 9.4 in 2050, and the demand for food will increase by more or less 60%. This is an enormous challenge for all of us, and I'm quite convinced we can face this challenge only with an intensive conventional agriculture. Second, prices and affordability. Yields are lower in organic farming, and the overall production costs are higher, so therefore organic food is more expensive. And there's a part of consumers who are able and willing to accept higher prices, and that's completely okay. If there's a demand for organic food in the market, why shouldn't farmer not respond to it and produce it? But this part of consumers who can afford higher prices is relatively high here in Europe, maybe in Canada, maybe in the United States, but in a lot of other parts of the world, it's very low. And even here in Europe, we have a lot of consumers who have to look at their wallet when they go to the shop to buy food. So considering the future global demand, we need food which is at the same time safe and affordable. Third and last point, how can we improve both systems, conventional and organic farming? Even organic farming needs pesticides. The fact that the substances they use normally exists in nature doesn't mean that they are not harmful. The good example is copper. It's a controversial substance, and organic farmers are aware of that, they know it. But they use it, they need to use it because otherwise the protection of some crops like wine or fruit is completely impossible. So to conclude, I'm convinced we will not win the challenge ahead of us focusing only on organic farming. We need to assure also the availability of safe, modern chemicals on the market which allows sustainable and intensive farming. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Mrs. Orkin, can I ask you to respond? We've heard a bit there about sort of land usage, prices, use of other materials such as copper, so I'd be interested to hear your response.
My problem is that if I'm going to respond, I didn't prepare a response.
We have 4 minutes to respond in whichever way you would like.
Because, okay, I can take it that way around. Animal welfare has been very much to do with how the life of the animals are. quality of the production is also part of this. It's not the same thing you have everywhere, just to say. And listen to you was a little bit to listen to all the opponents to the environmental debate back in the 70s. Just to tell you, you are quite old-fashioned, to be nice. I can tell you, even when I was a child in Denmark, early 50s, farming, and we had lots of farming family, were, as you know, small farms, and it was very few little machinery, tractors were introduced, which changed farming dramatically, which is very often not seen what happened with the tractor. But still, it was a small production, but lots and lots of farms. Today, farms are a large business, and the productivity is high, sure. In 2014, the Danish environmental authorities found out that the cost of pesticide residues is 68% of all non-organic fruit. It's quite a lot. Pesticides are in our environment, our food, and our bodies. It's directly related to IQ loss, obesity, diabetes, and male infertility. A prominent scientific study done by the estimated Danish scientist Philippe Grandjean has shown that these health issues cost the EU society 125 billion euro every year, if you look to cost benefits. And with the rapid changes in global climate system and the biodiversity, that will some cease to be diverse climatic, sorry, I cannot read this here, you know, but we will decrease biodiversity. That's very, very dangerous, also to the climate, which means also to the soil. In Paris, I had a 1-hour-long meeting with the director of the UN Convention on Biodiversity, Mr. Braulio, and he explained to me how important biodiversity was to climate. Not only to nice nature, but to climate. And it's so far away from what just has been said. And, you know, but this is not only economically, I'm also talking, I'm a grandmother of 8 children, and I really want them to have a future with a healthy production. So I tell them, as I tell, of course, my children, because they're their parents, to eat organic food, which is probably more common in Denmark than in many other countries. Yeah, but you know, you put me into double the
we've got a minute left.
But then I will do it then quite quickly, saying that we have knowledge. In Denmark, we have knowledge, inherent knowledge, and we have developed knowledge in organic farming. We have big farms, organic farms, who of course demand more workforce. But they can produce. And if we then take into consideration that we have to change the way we consume. The problem in Europe is not that we have too little food, you know that, all of you here. That is that we have too much food. We cannot get rid of it, and it's a heavy problem. But if we change our food habits much more into, to be nice, to an Italian way of eating, so that you eat much more vegetables, much less meat, and that is needed if we should survive.
Right, thank you.
And,
thank you.
okay,
Thank you very much.
So,
I think we can come back at the end.
No, yeah.
And Ms. Field, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lynn Field. I'm from a government-sponsored research organisation in the UK, where I head a department called Biological Chemistry and Crop Protection. So I guess you would expect me to be speaking in favour of crop protection. So why would I do that as a scientist? Well, I believe the scientific evidence is showing us completely that we would produce less food if we didn't have crop protection. We've heard some of the arguments, but it isn't just less food. That food would be less safe. We would have mycotoxins to worry about. It would be less nutritious because it wouldn't be so developed. It would be less efficient at taking up fertilizer. All of these things have to be considered from a scientific point of view and not from a gut reaction. So if we need crop protection, do we need pesticides? Well, there are clearly alternatives. One alternative is not to use pesticide at all, and that might work in some situations. In many situations, it wouldn't. We have host plant resistance. That's a great technique. It works for a lot of pathogens, but pathogens are really clever. They get around host plant resistance. It's not stable and it's not sustainable. We have to make it so, and these alternatives have to come on stream. But this is not happening yet, so we still need pesticide to fill that gap. Biocontrol works in covered crops, not so well in the field. Some of the novel things we're working on, semiochemistry, chemical ecology, all stuff we do at Rothamsted, is not yet at the farmer's field. It's at the experimental stage. So yes, we do still need pesticides. And I believe pesticides are inherently safe. They have very low mammalian toxicity. Modern pesticides, it wasn't always true. They have been very well regulated before they get on the market, and they have to be used according to rules. And if that is put in place, they are safe in my view. Of course, we should be aware of non-target effects. Of course, we should look for effects we weren't expecting, and we should try to mitigate for those. We should look to legislation if we need to, but it must be based in science. We must understand what we mean by sublethal effects. We must know what that really means out in the field, and we must know what the alternative means. The alternative to use a different pesticide or to not use pesticide. They have to be part of the debate. It is not in anyone's interest to overuse pesticides. Chemical companies are not going to sell them if they don't need to because of the risks of resistance. So we're all on the same side of trying to minimize the use of pesticide to the point where it has a role, but it isn't the only thing in our armory. And on the back of that, I would like to end by saying we really have to look at what's around the corner. We have pests, pathogens, and weeds. They're all evolving, they're all changing, they're all adapting to new environments, they're being moved around the world, and we have to have something to counter them. We have to be able to avoid that epidemic that might happen, which we're not expecting, and which could take out a crop. And so, in my view, at the moment, we rely on pesticides for that. We will work towards replacing them, to integrating them into true pest management, and that's where all the science community needs to go, and we need to get better at explaining what we're doing, and we need to work with everyone, with companies, with NGOs, with non-scientists, and we need to talk to the public, and that's really why I'm here today. Thank you.
Mr. Klastic.
Food produced without pesticides is safer than food produced with pesticides. In particular, more safe for those who are producing this food. I'm a toxicologist, and I know very well that pesticides are toxicologically tested. Will this count?
No, your time, the clock stops. Gamesmanship from the other side.
I said that.
No, don't. But that, and also start again because the people have broken your flow. Start your section again.
The entire section.
No, you'll have broken.
Yeah.
Your flow was broken, so start again.
What I said is that I'm a toxicologist. I know that pesticides are toxicologically tested. I know how they are tested, but they are tested as individual substances. But in reality, we are exposed to a multitude of chemicals. We are exposed to pesticides and other compounds, and this mix makes us to be concerned about low-level exposure, because this mix is impossible to be tested. The end result we see in cancer rates going up by 3 times or 2 times within 40 years. These are the official statistics in Germany. And these are age-corrected statistics, so don't tell me that this is because people are growing older and getting more cancer because they are growing more old. So, in essence, this means more suffering for people, and similarly important, more expenses for healthcare. What is affordable food? Can this affordability be discussed in isolation? In Germany, people use about 10 to 15% of their income to buy food. Such food prices, I think, are too low, while rents are too high, and healthcare, as I mentioned, is on the rise, healthcare costs. Farm gate prices, I think many will agree with this, are way too low, and farmers are moaning because of the price pressure coming from retailers and because of the volatility of commodity markets. But using herbicides as a means to keep labor costs low, I think is an unsustainable practice. It is the displacement of costs from agriculture into the public domain. Do we need pesticides to ensure that 9.7 billion people can be fed in year 2050? We don't need them if there is a political will. Right now in Europe, we waste 1/3 of our food. We also know that currently there is enough food produced in the world to feed the entire population, but 850 million people are in chronic hunger and undernourished. In addition, we consume 3 times more in Europe on average. In the US, it's even worse. We consume 3 times more animal protein than the nutritional optimum. And everybody, I hope, in this room knows how much more you need to produce in terms of plants, in terms of feed, instead of feeding this to the population of the world. For the Global South, evidence is mounting that with agroecological methods, you can double food production within 10 years. And this is without the support which industrial agriculture has received in terms of funding of research and extension. And if you imagine how much could be achieved if this amount of money would go into promoting and researching agroecology, you would feel much safer about this perspective, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Glatz.
Mr. Chairman, MEPs, ladies and gentlemen, as Christian has said, my name is Tom Short, arable farmer from east of Ireland, and it's a great privilege to stand here in front of such a selected audience to listen to our side of the argument. Just a few points. Irish and European farmers produce an abundance of safe quality food through the adoption of modern methods, including some plant protection products and in a controlled, environmentally friendly environment. As a result, the EU is one of the largest agricultural producing regions in the world, sustaining huge employment right across Europe's diverse rural community. And from the little village that I live in, there's probably 2/3 of the people involved in either farming or food-related industries. So it is very, very important to us. The judicial use of plant protection products in conjunction with improved plant breeding and the adoption of cultural control methods enables Irish farmers to consistently achieve the highest yields of cereals and crops in the world. Professional farmers have adopted integrated pest management practices in order to maximise yields while reducing the dependence on plant protections. I've never met a farmer yet that uses too much of any particular product, thus minimising and developing the development of pest resistance. With the withdrawal of any crucial active ingredients, it will automatically jeopardise production across many regions within Europe. It has also significantly increased the carbon footprint. It will reduce yields and a huge loss of quality, increase the risk to human and animal health through the increased exposure of mycotoxins and more, accelerated the build-up of disease and pest resistance. The key loss of any plant protection products would jeopardise crop production right across Europe. Producers who employ many, many thousands of people, about 10,000 in Ireland, directly employed with crop production. These jobs would be put at risk, and I know, we're famous in Ireland for some of our food and our drink. Imagine the world without Guinness, and that's what could happen. Cereal and potato yields would, in a normal disease pressure year, could be reduced anything up to 50% in yield. Where do we feed the world from if this has happened? And history will tell us, and it will tell us and has told us in our own little country. Back in the last century, we had a problem with the potato crop. There was famine. There was over 1 million people lost through famine. So there is no reason to say that couldn't happen again if we lost a lot of these plant protection products. The loss of small-scale arable farmers would impact negatively on biodiversity and has resulted and can result in a significant decline in the birds and the bees. Simple as we see with the loss of neonicotinoids, the oilseed rape crop has been demolished, absolutely demolished. So that's only one particular crop that has been in huge, has changed hugely because of action that was taken. Europe is one of the world's largest producers of cereals, producing close to 13% of the world's grain. It ranks as a major contributor to the production and would cause significant spikes in grain and food prices if we lost pesticides. What would happen? And this has happened as late as 2007, when we've seen the price of wheat go to an all-time high. I think to conclusion, as a farmer, I believe that we need pesticides, we have to work with them, we have to trust them, and Europe needs to make rational decisions based on scientific fact rather than political ideology.
Thank you, Mr. Short.
Thank you.
Well, hello. Just a little question. I just asking myself why ECPA cut the sweet part of the orange away. Anyway, as a fruit farmer, you can understand this question. As a farmer, I must say we are all concerned about this question, pesticides or not. And our aim is to produce best quality, healthy food, achievable for everyone. I also understand that facts are disturbed by food waste as well as price pressure. Therefore, I can't condemn colleagues who have no more choice than using cheaper chemicals to produce. But finally, all of us know the issues and dangers of using those chemicals. We all know people affected with diseases that are presumably caused by pesticides. I can tell you about myself. I'm just a converting farmer to organic. It happened that I had skin irritations, headaches, etc. I can speak about my father, who had prostate cancer. Then he got a skin cancer. After this came leukemia. And unfortunately, finally, he died from a brain tumor. Then I can speak about my neighbor. He has leukemia. All farmers. Yes, I must say orchardists or wine growers, pesticide-consuming farmers. So my question is there no way out of this scheme? For me, as far as I know, science has already alternatives. Cleaner natural methods, maybe using less nitrogen as fertilizers. Maybe in viticulture, replacing herbicides in the rows by cultivation. Other alternatives are technology that will surely, in some cases, make pesticides obsolete. In orchards, some are testing with fine-meshed nets around the orchards, etc. And then pests and diseases are getting modelized, so this is also a tool we can use to reduce or to fade out pesticides. And Linda spoke about we have disease-tolerant plants and we can use them. So anyway, when using crop protection products, we should be aware of side effects as well as damages on beneficials. It is unfortunately still common that in some regions pyrethroids are commonly used in vineyards, even if there are plenty of alternatives. And we know that pyrethroids, this is like a snowball effect. We are cultivating pests then if we use them too much. Why not thinking the other way around? So for me, clearly, as farmers, we stand in front of a bridge called future, arguing on whether we shall cross it and on how we shall cross it. Let us concentrate on making first firm steps to go with a new way of clean farming. I think we can simply slash pesticides out now, but could we simply concentrate on alternatives and move forward all together?
Thank you. We'll come back to this point at the end. Can I... Thank you. Now, this is where I ask the audience to get involved. And can I just remind you to specify at the beginning whether you would like your reply from the MEPs, the scientists, or the farmers, to specify which group. And then each of those will have a minute to respond on each camp. I think we're going to take a first question from a visiting farmer, if that's the idea. Can we have a quick show of hands at the front here? If that's agreed, or we can just throw it over to the entire... We can open it up to the entire audience instead. Yes, sir, here. I think there's a microphone coming for you as well.
Thank you. My name is Chris Davis. I'm a former member of the Parliament. I think my question is to the proponents of the motion, and perhaps particularly to the scientist. Let's assume that we all want plenty of food and we want it at the lowest possible price. But we also want to halt the loss of biodiversity, and that loss must be in part attributable to the use of pesticides. How do we reconcile these objectives?
Okay, I think...
Would you like to come up to the podium here?
I think you're entirely right. We want to do all of these things at once, and it is quite a challenge. But I think there are options available and coming on stream. I think we have to look for very high selectivity in the pesticides we do use. We have to make sure now that those are targeted only to the target pest. This is a real challenge, especially in insecticides, where one insect is a pest and one is a beneficial. But these things are possible if we really understand how pesticides work on their targets, how they're metabolized by different species. If we stop treating all pesticides within one group as being equal, and understand that some have different toxicity profiles, that you can't extrapolate from one species to the next or from one chemical to the next, and we have enough data, I think we can put in place pesticides that work without affecting biodiversity. If there is some effect on biodiversity, we have to weigh that up against food production. We have to think very carefully about how we're going to handle this. Are we going to try and have biodiversity sharing with crop production, the so-called sharing scenario, where it might not be optimal for either? Or are we going to have a sparing scenario, where we have crops grown with inputs that don't necessarily lead to huge biodiversity, but we free up more land for biodiversity?
Thank you very much.
And that's an option.
Thank you very much. And can I what does that level of targeting seem realistic to you?
The first step would be to refrain from transforming those parts of the world where there is still a lot of biodiversity and a lot of peasant farmers into large-scale agriculture, because, as I mentioned, there are plenty of methods insufficiently supported by science and by extension to increase yields without this type of agriculture in an area which would require an ecological matrix so that biodiversity would still exist. And this would be the first, and I think the most realistic step in addition to thinking about how to change it in Europe.
Okay, thank you. Can I take the next question from the audience, please? The gentleman at the back here.
Hello, thank you. My name is Gustav Blix. I am from the free market think tank Epicenter here in Brussels. My question is to the scientists, and it's the concern of innovation. If we all agree that we've seen a great number of innovation in agriculture in the last decades, providing us with safer and cheaper food, what will happen if we start slashing pesticides now with the ability of having a new type of innovation take place? Because if you can't be selling and producing pesticides today, how will you then be funding the pesticides or other technologies for tomorrow? And if you're not going to look at that kind of type of solution of increasing yields and production, are you then open to look at other fields, like, for example, genetically modified techniques or other things to compensate for the fact?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go back up again.
Oh, that was me again.
Yes.
Okay, so you've touched on another thorny issue of GM, and that is not the subject of today's debate. But I think it is something we can't overlook. I think innovation has been vital in agriculture, and innovation has to continue. Companies who sell pesticides are also innovating. They're trying to use the work they do. And research organizations, of course, I would say this, need more funding so that we can bring more innovation on stream. And in terms of GM especially, I talked earlier about having host plant resistance. Now, that has largely depended on breeding. That's quite a long process. We could circumvent that with GM and gene editing, but that would be a whole other area we would have to sell to the public. People don't like pesticides, they don't really like GM. But GM can be very beneficial if you're trying to minimize pesticides and avoid off targets. So we do need to continue to innovate, and we have to take all the technologies on board. And the innovation principle is much sounder than relying on some precautionary principle where you just assume if there's any risk at all, you aren't going to do it. In my view, innovation is the key to all of this.
Right, thank you. Yes, it is you again.
I thank you for the question because I refrained from saying the topic is ill-phrased here. Slashing pesticides is not the issue. What we demand is phasing out the pesticides. We are realistic, but having real steps of phasing out and developing alternatives to replace them. So this is the first point. The second, I think I have emphasized repeatedly that agroecology involves a lot of innovation, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of necessity to extend the knowledge to other people and to put it into practice. And finally, and I would be pleased if someone from ECPA would say that I'm wrong. Once, as industry, you have a pesticide on the market, you try to keep it because you are making money from it. So that's a basic driver. I've worked for 12 years in the pharmaceutical industry. I know how the business is running. And if you want to phase out pesticides, you do not do it on goodwill because you personally think that it should go out because it's maybe harmful.
Thank you. Yes? Sorry? You can't actually, I'm afraid. You'd be breaking the rules if you do that. So, but I'm actually, does anybody specifically have a farmer question before we go on? For farmers. Is this one for farmers? Okay. Okay, I'll ask it. It's to Mr. Rochier, but be replied from the other side as well. So it's, how do you place pesticides with other innovations if the environmental movement and the organic sector blocks innovation? Which has been responded to already, but you can...
Well, with a lot of... It's working or not?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, I think we have many things still to discover in science. We have many things to move forward. And I would say nowadays science is knowing maybe about 0.5 meter or less from the distance from the Earth to the Moon. So the question is quite difficult, how to replace pesticides. I'm moving from IPM using pesticides, still chemical pesticide 3 years ago, moving to organic. And yes, we use plenty of other things now. We don't use any more herbicides. We work the soil. We moved from using chemical fertilizers to organic fertilizers. We use so-called natural pesticides, what are maybe diseases for some insects. Yes, we use them, but is it not a little bit more safe nowadays using that rather than using pyrethroids?
Okay, thank you. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, to make a very practical observation there, that how are we changing? Like, the use of pesticides is actually decreasing year on year, and there is a huge change within Europe to move away from monocropping. And rotation is so important. I think that is leaving farmers produce that quality food without repetition. So you have a better rotation. Diseases are not building up. Pests are not being, the different pests are not being interfered with. So there is actually plenty of innovation in the fact that no area will be allowed to have no farm will allow to have one crop. We must have 3 crops, and that's coming from Europe. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sorry.
Hi, I'm Robert de Graaf from the European Landowners Organization. We represent both conventional crop protection using farmers and organic farmers. But I have a question that's never been sort of quite clear to us from the opposing team, and I'm happy to take it from the MEP or the scientist or the farmer, whoever feels more comfortable answering it, is the goal, if you say we can do better without pesticide, do you mean by that no pesticides at all? Or do you mean no synthetics, but we do allow organic crop protection such as copper, sulfates, that kind of thing? Yes. Because there's a very crucial difference between none at all and no synthetics. And for us, it's difficult to see how you would do it completely without any crop protection.
Yeah, well, of course, it's not my file in Parliament, but just to say, we're not, as was said just here, we are not for an immediate phase out, firstly. Secondly, if reuse of phosphorus, phosphorus is absolutely dramatically needed. In Denmark, we have lots of phosphorus in the earth, but we still import a lot of phosphorus and we put it out in the sea, which is not very clever. But if we should reuse phosphorus, which we should do, I would see this as an innovation compared to what is done now. Phosphorus is a fertilizer. You cannot produce food without phosphorus. It's impossible to produce food without phosphorus. Do you disagree? Phosphate. Sorry. Yeah, phosphate. Sorry for the language. But phosphate. Sorry. Come on, idiot. But it's not a pesticide. But it's a plant. You need it, and that's innovation. This pretext that organic farmers are against innovation. Who said that? It's nonsense. Saying we have no problems with pesticides was one of the other questions here. We have problems with pesticides. The figures I referred to before from Grandchamp shows an enormous health problem. It's only the agricultural chemical industry who is suffering from the cost.
Yes. Thank you.
We just forget human health here.
You may want to actually respond to that rather than the actual question.
Well, I would say farming on a larger scale without crop protection is completely impossible. But in organic farming and in conventional farming, it's completely impossible. And if you look to specific crops, like I'm coming from a region with a lot of vineyards, this year, which was a difficult one, the organic farmers did up to 30 treatments a year, the organic ones. because they have at their disposal products which are less effective than the other ones. So I think it's not a question, as I said before, if we don't need pesticides or yes or not, it's a question which one. And I'm convinced that we have to go forward on the quality of pesticides. I'm a rapporteur in the Parliament in this moment on biopesticides. That's an important, extremely important issue. But I think we should not, somebody thinks that organic farming works without pesticides. That's not true at all.
Right, and the gentleman here in the second row.
Thank you very much. Stuart Agnew, MEP and a British farmer. 2 quick questions to the scientists on those who oppose the motion. Can you put your hand on your heart and say that rotenone and certain copper compounds that are used as naturally occurring fungicides in organic farming, are they safer than the synthetic pesticides that have passed many tests? Can you categorically say they are safer? Secondly, there is a cohort of individuals in Western Europe now who have used pesticides as sprayer operators. I am one of them. For 40 years, I was exposed to these in the concentrated form. I got them on my skin. I got the drift, and I'm still here. Yet we are not considered a higher life assurance category.
I can offer that either to the scientist or Mr. Rotgeber, whoever would like to go. We can have 30 seconds each then.
Okay, just as an example for copper, and we heard just before, I'm wine grower, and we use copper, but we try to reduce it. And I know that organic growers and my colleagues usually use less copper than traditional or IPM growers.
Is your question actually on whether it counts as a synthetic material? Then?
Is it safer? Is it safer? Copper is not. Copper and rotenone you cannot compare. But copper, well, rotenone is not so safe, and copper is either not so safe. This is why we try, as organic farmers, not to use rotenone where we can, and we try to minimize copper.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rotgeber, and we'll take the safety questions.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what your non-health problem or non-disease problem was. I heard all the rest of the sentence, but what compound have you been talking about?
Organic farmers use naturally occurring compounds. One of those is something called rotenone, another a copper compound.
Yeah, but then
can you put your hand on your heart and say that those materials are safer?
He's taking the second part of the question, which is on general health concerns.
I don't know what compound you talked about where you were surprised that you are still alive.
Well, these are these wicked, evil, filthy pesticides that the terrible multinational companies make money out of. I must have used 60 or 70, probably 100 of them in the concentrated, the naked form, been really exposed to them, as have many other sprayer operators throughout Western Europe, and yet we are not considered a higher health risk than anybody else. We are the guinea pigs, if you like, and if we can survive it, being exposed 100 times fold more than anybody else, what is the problem?
Do you know the German former Chancellor Helmut Schmidt? You know how many cigarettes he smoked per day, and he died at the age of 96. But what I'm trying to say is that you cannot deduce from your own personal situation to the population, because no, that's not true. I mean, there are clear and undisputed epidemiological studies that farmers have a higher incidence of tumors as compared to the general population. The dispute is about whether this is a particular compound.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have to get away from looking at individual examples of things. We can all find examples. What we need to look is the evidence. And I think we also need to move away from the idea that all natural compounds are good and not any risk, and all synthetics are bad. That isn't scientific. There is no scientific evidence to say that correlation is true. We need to look at a compound to see if it's toxic, not whether it's natural or whether it's synthetic.
And Tom, would you like to reply to either the copy usage or just on your own sort of the farmers' health issues?
Look, in fairness, farmers are very practical people and will always take precautionary use using any chemical. But I would certainly make the point that you can't say, phosphorus, it's a naturally occurring compound. Nothing will survive without it. It's not a pesticide. So we have to use it to grow crops, just as copper can be used as a naturally occurring pesticide. So the reality is that both sides are right in their side of the argument that they're taking, but we will not feed the world's population if we all just suddenly move away and slash using pesticides. Can it happen? Will not happen. People will have to come before the use of pesticides. The good food that has been produced for the last 20, 30, 40 years, and the volume of good food, because our consumers insist on that quality. They've got used to that quality, and they're not going to expect or use anything else. Thank you.
Actually, just stay there. Do you have one very brief question for him? Just one very brief point.
Very sorry, I was responding to this no innovation. And that was why I used this phosphorus argument. It was not about, sorry, I should have taken specifically on pesticides.
Okay. Can we take the question at the front here, please?
Thank you. Graham Taylor from European Crop Protection Association. I just wanted to pick up the challenge that you laid at our door a little earlier around our motives for wanting to sell pesticides. And I wanted to pick up that challenge by asking a question of Tom. Tom, you're a farmer. You're essentially a businessman. How often do you spend money on products that you do not need, that are not essential for your farm?
You've already
Never.
said this. No.
Absolutely never. And as I said earlier, I've yet to meet a farmer that will use anything other than the minimum of chemical, because chemicals are quite expensive. And farmers, they're environmentalists. They know how to look after the environment. They will not waste hard-earned money in the overuse of pesticides. Simple as.
Okay, thank you. Got a bit more.
Well, we have a little problem. Many times, cheaper pesticides are worse than the modern or organic ones. So, question is, when we look at the money of sprays and the spray cost, this is a forced debate. We cannot debate about this.
He can only see benefits.
Well,
okay, yeah.
Because you have very cheap insecticides you can use and spray and spray and spray and destroy everything, or you can use very insect-specific organic products to target one pest. This will be more expensive.
Right, okay. Sorry. Okay. Do you have a question? Could I just ask you as well to phrase the question to a group rather than a camp? So to the scientists, to the farmers, rather than to the pro or the anti side.
Yeah. I'm a farmer and I use pesticides and I care about my animal welfare. Why do you think that animal welfare and pesticides don't get together?
So who's this addressed to?
I was responding on something different, saying that it's the same diseases they get. And there I say there's a big difference on animals, especially pigs, who are living under healthy and animal welfare conditions, have a free life, compared to those who are put in these boxes here and tail cutting and lots of medicine from the beginning. Sorry, we have lots of pig production. I think Denmark is a leading pig production country, and use too much of all these things. And the tail cutting. What is it? There's a formal name on this.
Sorry, just more specifically on the pesticide.
Yeah, but you're not saying that's the reason why. No, it was asked. The question was not on pesticides, but the same diseases. One of you said it's the same diseases they get in both sides. And then I said it's very much depending on how the conditions are for the animals. They don't need so much if they are living under healthy conditions. As you have organic farmers who have much more protein in their production, not the amounts of the production, but the quality. We know that from Denmark too. They don't need so much because they have more in its proteins or what it could be, but they get paid from the EU from the amounts of production.
Okay.
Yes, and don't have. This is the battle we have in Denmark.
Well, I don't think animals are so different from human beings. You can do a lot of things to be more resistant. I love to go out for jogging in the wintertime, so it's more difficult to become ill. But this is not a guarantee not to become ill, and that's the same for animals. Sometimes they become ill, and if they become ill, you need to do something. If you don't have the availability of modern products like antibiotics, I don't see whether it is more animal welfare just to leave the animal ill there. I think it's worse.
Right, I think we have time for 2 more questions. There's a lady at the back first.
Sorry. Hanna Bliesbach from the State Representation of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. I have a question to the farmers. On the one side, what was the concrete reason for you to change to organic farming? And on the other side, what would make you change to organic farming in contrast to what you're doing right now? What would be the reasons for that in a hypothetical world?
Okay, well, main reason for me to change to organic farming was I'm coming from a farm where we were growing apples under IPM since the early 70s. So reducing pesticides was always a concern, also for my father, for everybody. And all for a sudden, IPM, as I knew it as a little boy, was watered down and, for me, became plain old standard agriculture. And caring about environment and knowing that we should and we can, if we want, where there's a will, there is a way. We can reduce chemicals, we can reduce toxics. So there was no other way.
Yeah, thank you. Anything that could persuade you to go again?
What would persuade me? Nothing at the minute would persuade me, because where we're farming, just south of Dublin, it's called the Garden of Ireland. I'm 30 years farming now, and I see what has happened in 30 years, the way quality and quantity has improved. And it's not all with the use of more and more pesticides. Absolutely not. It's rotation, it's better crop management. We're producing a product that our customers are demanding. So why would I change? There is no reason. The quality, and I have neighbours. I have very good neighbours that would have changed over to organic farming, but in reality, they're not able to produce the quality and the volume that is being demanded.
Just on that, very quick point on that, what about the economics of it, the economics of the organic label? Is that alluring?
No, look, I think it's organic certainly has a level that the consumers will want, but it is not everybody that can afford the extra cost of organic. Simple as that. We're producing a volume to supply. We grow enough food in Ireland for 55 million people, so a huge amount of it exported. And the quality is what is driving our market. It's the fact that we can produce good, consistent quality.
Thanks. I'm going to take the gentleman in the white shirt in the third row here. The final question.
Thank you. Hi, it's Will Birkin from the RSPB and BirdLife. I just wanted to bring up the issue of integrated pest management. This is a question for the scientists. So rather than pesticides being used systemically, should they only be used as a last resort, whereby crop rotations, careful choice of crop varieties, and encouragement of crop predators has failed? Because that's what we've practiced for years at RSPB Hope Farm in the east of England, and we've found we've had similar yields, increased profitability, because we haven't had those costs on pesticides, because we use very small amounts.
An answer?
Okay, yes, of course we should be trying to integrate pesticides with other protection. I think you're making the assumption that pesticides, when they're used early on, perhaps as seed treatments, are prophylactic. That's not always the case. In many cases, we know a pest will arrive. We know that cabbage stem flea beetle will eat oilseed rape. So we are not using them prophylactically, we're using them as seed treatment to try and prevent large-scale use and spraying. I would advocate that that's better for a wildlife. If you have a complete monoculture, it's not going to be good for birds. I would totally agree with that, but largely it's better if they're insectivorous. You'll have killed off the insects. But no, there is some evidence that in certain circumstances that can happen, but if the seed is treated and sown properly, then I don't think that does happen. I think we have to look at the evidence in a whole.
Okay.
Well, I'm a toxicologist and probably ill-prepared to give a solid answer to your question.
Okay. Well, I think what we will do is we will, so we're moving quickly to the section where we should hear your conclusions. I mean, we've had a very wide-ranging debate which has taken in a sort of number of factors. So I'd like to actually ask Mr. Dorfman to come up first to give his sort of conclusions of whether he's been shaken on anything he's heard, anything has changed his mind.
Well, thank you very much. To conclude, just 5 points. First, I'm convinced farmers need freedom of choice. It should be up to them to decide between organic farming and conventional farming. Second, this choice must be driven by market orientation and not by political ideologies. Third, the use of chemical substances made it possible to feed Europe and most part of the world for the first time in history. And Madame Auken, this nice past world with the small farms, well, it was very nice, but there was hunger in Europe at that time. We should not forget this. There was hunger in Europe. For the first time, we were able to feed Europe. Fourth, considering the challenges ahead of us, I'm convinced it will be very difficult to reject chemicals in modern agriculture. And fifth and last point, I'm convinced the real challenge is to improve the use of chemical substances. Use less, improve breeding, use all possibilities of integrated pest management. By the way, I'm coming from a region which is considered one of the leading regions when it comes up to integrated pest management. Ban old harmful substances on the basis of scientific evidence and not on the basis of political choices or political ideologies. Introduce new, modern and safer substances. And I think only if we achieve this, we can have an agriculture which is really sustainable, which is productive and intensive. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I mean, as you know, you want to sort of the big organic farms.
Yes, I mentioned that it don't need to be small farms. That was from the proposal from the Commission, as it should only be a niche production. That was what we got from the Commission originally when discussing organic farming. No, we have big organic farms in Denmark, and we also have a market. Yeah, I can hear the difference to Ireland. We have an increasing market. Milk is almost all of it organic now, and people want it. And they can adapt to also the pricing. And imagine that the pesticides should include the external costs. The external cost for environment, for health, the figures I mentioned before, which we know from the scientists, are dramatic if we look at biodiversity, if we look at health, on the impact on, for instance, the male fertility. How come that you don't react to this? I thought that we would get the men on the barricades if their fertility was raised. No, they're just making fertility technology. Come on. It's going dramatically down. And, you know, biodiversity, climate, health is basic here. And then we can follow that it can develop. None of us called for an immediate phase out of pesticides. But it must be the goal that we can find a way to produce our food where we don't destroy the earth and we don't destroy human health. And it's not just religion. What we saw when the Commission was lobbied by some guys here, when we got the response to the endocrine disruptors, and they called for all the costs for them and ignored the costs for the society, and we was in a terrible situation because Catherine Day, who was your best friend in the Commission, decided not to live up to the rules in the treaty and postponed it and said we should make a cost-benefit analysis and only look into the cost-benefit for industry and not for society. It's not acceptable. It's not okay. And I think we have to fight for a future, a healthy, biodiverse future where all of us can survive.
Thank you very much.
My mind. Well, I would not have changed my mind because we've had a debate and debates are fine, but I would only change my mind on scientific evidence because in my view I want to study evidence and I want to sum up a situation. Now, let's get back to the motion. The motion was that slashing pesticides would prevent us growing food, and I still think that that's true. We may be able to phase them out. We may be able to use them more sensibly. We may be able to integrate them. I wouldn't argue against that. I'd be absolutely in favour of that as a scientist, but that wasn't what the debate said. The debate said that slashing pesticides would prevent us growing enough affordable, safe food, which I still maintain. And some of the alternatives we've heard about are coming on stream. Agroecology is a wonderful new area. We're putting a lot of effort into it, but it's not there yet. We cannot slash pesticides at this moment and still produce enough, safe, affordable food.
Very good.
As a non-native speaker, I became only aware of the meaning of the word slashing when we talked in preparation with Politico. Otherwise, I probably would not have gone into this debate at all. Number two, I haven't heard any argument or doubts from the questions that agroecology is innovative, that agroecology can increase yields. I haven't heard any doubts that the pesticide effect has a role in the increase of cancer rates. I didn't open up the box of endocrine disruptors, and I was disappointed by the claim that my challenge to ECPA was taken up because I asked for telling me a pesticide which had been voluntarily removed from the market by industry. I was not talking about the farmers. So taking this together, I think I would be surprised if everybody stays to its own motion because I haven't felt any opposition to the arguments I brought to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, look, in fairness, the debate has actually been very productive, and the arguments from both sides. But the reality is, we have 9.5 billion people to feed in the world. You cannot feed those people without the quality of food that we are now producing and continue to produce. From a farmer's perspective, there's lots of things. We as farmers, as I said earlier, we're environmentalists. We will look after that environment as the generations did before us. Monocropping will not be used in long term. And coming from a country where there's only a little less than 10% of the whole land base in crop, we are very green. We have a huge amount of biodiversity out there. But the reality is, if we don't protect that 10% and we lose it, well, the other 90% will suffer on the consequences. We have huge progress has been made through the use of GPS controlled equipment that will avoid duplication of any chemical. And that is the sort of technology that we as farmers are working towards, the use of drones and blanket covering of crops with any chemical is not something we will do, but we do know that our customers demand the very, very best quality, and that's what we will endeavour. Thank you very much.
Well, for me, finally, I'm a Christian believer, and for me, the point is we should respect the creation and recognize its creator. But then I see we should also feed people. And a short while ago, I stumbled upon a press text showing pictures of apples being destroyed this year, freshly picked apples. And I'm asking, why? So if we want to feed the world, just first stop destroying harvest. So my conclusion would be stop talking, start acting.
Right. Well, this is the moment where it sees what effect this has all had upon you. I mean, I suppose from a scientific point of view, I've got to note we've got a very sort of thin selection of individuals here. But let us see, with a second vote that we have now, whether there's been any change or whether there's been any momentum in the other direction over the course of this debate. I think that the majority to start off with was about 5 times in favour of the motion. But let us see with a second show of hands now whether that has changed. So can I first of all ask for those still in favour of the motion?
Surprise, surprise.
Okay, thank you. And can I look at those against the motion? No, it's increased. So, I mean, to conclude today's debate, the motion is carried with a majority, but there has been a swing towards the opposition. And I should note that this is only sort of the beginning or the middle of a sort of very long and deep debate. So thank you all very much for coming today. Thank you.